She forgot her phone and came home to a scene she never expected. Her husband in bed with his secretary. Heartbroken and furious, she decided to leave him. But the very next day, she received a shocking surprise that changed everything. What she discovered next left her speechless. Sarah Mitchell had it all. A successful real estate career, a beautiful home in Miami, Florida, and a seemingly perfect marriage to John Mitchell, a 38-year-old entrepreneur. They had been together since their college days, and after a whirlwind romance, they married when they were both 23. First, everything was perfect. They were in sync, supporting each other's dreams. Sarah's real estate career took off, and John's tech startup became a fast-rising star in the business world. It seemed like nothing could go wrong. But slowly, things began to shift. John became more absorbed in his work, his tech company taking up more and more of his time. At first, Sarah was understanding, always supportive. She had her own busy career after all, and they still managed to have quality time together. But over the years, those moments became fewer and fewer. The long evenings at the office became routine for John, and the weekends away on business trips grew more frequent. Sarah found herself alone more often than she liked, left with only the walls of their large house for company. She tried to ignore it, but it gnawed at her. The house, which once felt like a haven, now seemed too big, too empty. The more she tried to hold onto the life they had built, the further away John seemed to drift. There was a coldness between them now, one that she couldn't explain, but she could feel it. The once vibrant love they shared seemed to have evaporated, replaced by something distant and hollow. The tension in their marriage grew over time, and Sarah began to suspect that something wasn't right. John was always evasive. His phone was never far from his reach, and his late nights at the office became more frequent. Sarah dismissed the thoughts at first. Surely, she was just being paranoid, overthinking things. But as the months passed, her unease grew, and one evening, she couldn't take it anymore. That evening, she decided to confront him. As she walked into their bedroom, she found John sitting at the desk, his eyes glued to his computer screen. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her. The house was quiet, and it felt as though time had slowed down. Sarah took a deep breath, walking over to him. "John," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "What's going on with us?" John looked up, his face betraying nothing. He smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "What do you mean?" "Everything's fine." But Sarah knew better. She had felt the distance between them for too long. The words had been stuck in her throat for so long that they were now spilling out before she could stop them. "No, it's not. You've been distant, cold. I feel like I don't even know you anymore." John didn't answer right away. He leaned back in his chair, staring at her for a moment, before letting out a long sigh. "Sarah, I think you're overreacting. I've just been busy, that's all. You know how it is." "I know," she said, her voice growing firmer. "But this isn't just about work, John. I've seen the way you've been acting, and I can't ignore it anymore." John shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding her gaze. It was as if he was trying to find the right words, but none came. Finally, he muttered, "You're imagining things. There's nothing going on." But Sarah wasn't convinced. The doubt in her heart grew stronger, and that night, she decided to take matters into her own hands. After he fell asleep, she quietly went through his phone. She knew it was wrong, but her suspicion had already taken root, and she had to know the truth. As she sifted through the messages, she found what she feared. There, in plain sight, were the text messages between John and Nina Davis, a 29-year-old graphic designer. Nina was someone Sarah had once called a friend. They had met through mutual connections, and Sarah had even introduced Nina to John at one point. The messages were intimate, full of longing and affection. It was clear that John and Nina were involved in a full-blown affair. Sarah's heart sank as she read the messages, each word stabbing deeper than the last. She felt the walls closing in around her, the weight of the betrayal almost suffocating. Her hands shook as she put the phone back in its place, the reality of it all settling in. She wanted to scream, to break something, but she held herself together. The next morning, Sarah waited for John to wake up. When he finally did, she sat across from him at the breakfast table, her face a mask of cold composure. John looked at her, sensing the tension in the air. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice cautious. "Tell me about Nina," Sarah said flatly, her voice cold. John froze. He knew exactly what she was referring to. "Sarah, please. I didn't want you to find out this way." "Then how did you think I would find out?" she snapped. "By accident? Or did you think I wouldn't notice? You're having an affair with her, John. A woman I trusted. A woman I called a friend." "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't supposed to happen. I never meant to hurt you." "Do you love her?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking with anger. John hesitated for a moment. The silence between them seemed endless. Finally, he admitted, "I don't know. I'm confused." "Confused?" Sarah repeated, her voice rising. "You've been lying to me for months? And now you're confused? I don't want to hear your excuses, John. I want the truth." He lowered his gaze, unable to meet her eyes. "I don't know what to say. I never meant for this to happen." But Sarah was beyond the point of reasoning. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal, everything boiled over inside her. "I want a divorce," she said, her voice steady but filled with finality. John's face drained of color. "What? Sarah, please, don't." "I want a divorce," she repeated, cutting him off. "I can't do this anymore. You've broken everything we had." With that, she stood up and walked out of the room, leaving John sitting there, speechless. The life they had built together was crumbling, and Sarah felt a mix of sadness, anger, and a strange sense of relief. This was the end of their marriage. But as she left the house to meet with her lawyer, a thought crossed her mind. If John thought he could get away with this, he was mistaken. Sarah wasn't going to just walk away quietly. No, she was going to fight, and she would make him pay for the lies and the betrayal. As Sarah drove to the lawyer's office, her heart hardened. This wasn't just about a divorce anymore. It was about taking back what was hers, and about making John regret every decision that had led them to this point. The battle had just begun. Sarah sat in the small, sleek office of her lawyer, Maria Henderson, feeling a strange mix of emotions. There was anger, frustration, and something else, determination. After everything John had done to her, the betrayal with Nina, the hidden financial assets, and the years of emotional neglect, Sarah was not about to let him walk away unscathed. Maria looked over the documents Sarah had brought, her expression professional yet sympathetic. "I know this must be hard for you, Sarah, but we're going to fight for everything you deserve," Maria said, looking up from the papers. Sarah nodded, her eyes hard. "I want more than just my fair share, Maria. I want him to pay for what he's done. He's lied to me, betrayed me, and hid millions from me. He thought he could get away with it, but I'm not going to let him." Maria gave a small nod, understanding the fire in Sarah's eyes. "We'll go after the financials, of course. But what about the emotional side of things? Do you want to pursue the affair in court?" "Absolutely," Sarah said without hesitation. "I want it all out there. I want him to know that his secrets are going to be exposed." Maria glanced at Sarah, then began typing notes into her computer. "I think you're right. If we can show that he's been hiding assets and involved in illegal activities, it will work in your favor. But you need to be prepared for a tough fight. John won't go down without a fight, and neither will Nina." Sarah felt a coldness spread through her. John and Nina. She had never imagined the betrayal would come from someone she considered a friend. Nina had always been supportive, kind, and part of their social circle. To think that Nina was involved with John behind her back, after everything they had shared, was a bitter pill to swallow. But she wasn't going to let Nina off easy either. No one would get away with this. "I don't care about Nina. She's just as guilty as he is," Sarah said, her voice low and filled with venom. "She helped him destroy my life, and now she's going to pay for it too." Maria nodded. "We'll make sure she doesn't escape the consequences either. But you need to be cautious, as much as you want to hurt them both. Remember that the courts are watching your every move." Sarah stood up, feeling the weight of the situation. "I know. I've thought about it a lot. I just want them to regret everything." Days turned into weeks as the divorce proceedings moved forward. Sarah was relentless in her pursuit of justice, digging into John's financials, using her real estate connections to gather information, and working closely with Maria to expose John's hidden assets. What she discovered shocked her even more than she had anticipated. John had been hiding over $3 million in offshore accounts, money he had funneled away from their marriage. Sarah had always trusted him, believing that their success was built on mutual respect and honesty. But now, she realized that John had been playing a game from the very start. It wasn't just the money. John had been involved in shady business dealings, including tax fraud, using his startup's finances to cover up illegal transactions. Sarah had never suspected any of this. She had always thought John was just busy with work, doing what he needed to do to make the business successful. But now, it was clear that his success had come at the cost of honesty, and Sarah was determined to expose him for the world to see. The pressure of the divorce was starting to show on John. Sarah could see it in the way he moved, the way he looked over his shoulder, and the way he started acting defensive whenever she confronted him. He had always been a confident man, the kind who knew how to manipulate situations to his advantage. But now he was cornered, and it seemed that he knew it. One evening, as Sarah sat in her apartment, going through more documents, she received a text message from an unknown number. It was from Nina. The message was simple, but the words sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. "You're ruining everything. Let it go. It's not worth it." Sarah's fingers gripped the phone tightly. She wasn't surprised that Nina was trying to reach out to her, but the audacity of it. Nina was still trying to manipulate the situation, trying to make Sarah feel guilty for wanting justice. Sarah laughed bitterly, typing back a message before throwing her phone onto the couch. "It's too late for you to play the victim. You both betrayed me. I'm not backing down now." After sending the message, Sarah leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She had already exposed John's illegal activities in their business dealings, but now, it was time to make Nina pay. She had to bring everything to light. Nina's affair with John, the lies, and the manipulation. She knew it would destroy both of them, but she didn't care. They had taken everything from her, and now she was taking it all back. She contacted her lawyer the next morning, determined to take the next step. Maria agreed that it was time to go public with everything. They would leak the evidence to the press and ensure that the public would know exactly what John and Nina had done. The world would see them for who they really were. As Sarah prepared for the next phase of her plan, she felt a strange sense of calm. She had been consumed by anger for weeks, but now, she was in control. She was taking back her life, piece by piece, and she wasn't going to stop until she had destroyed everything John and Nina had built on their lies. But as the pieces of her revenge started falling into place, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. John and Nina weren't the only ones who had been playing games. There were other forces at work, and Sarah was just beginning to uncover the full extent of the betrayal. And as she would soon find out, the true cost of her revenge would be higher than she could ever have imagined. Sarah stood in front of the large windows in her apartment, the warm Miami sun setting over the city. She had been through a whirlwind of emotions in the past few weeks, but now, there was only one thing on her mind: revenge. She was on the cusp of breaking John and Nina. The evidence had been gathered, the leaks to the media had been planned, and Sarah had made sure that John's illegal activities were about to become public knowledge. But as Sarah prepared to make her move, she received another unexpected message, this time from John. The text came through as she sipped her coffee, her fingers brushing over the screen. "Sarah, please, let's talk. I've made a mistake, and I want to fix things. I'm sorry." For a moment, Sarah felt a pang of disbelief. Was he really trying to salvage something? After everything? The audacity of him. But then the cold anger returned. John wasn't sorry, he was desperate. And that desperation wasn't for her, but for himself. He knew the walls were closing in, and now he was trying to manipulate his way back into her life. She didn't respond to his text immediately. Instead, she stared at her phone, letting the weight of the situation sink in. John had betrayed her, hidden millions from her, and been caught in illegal activities. And now, as his empire crumbled, he wanted to come back. No, Sarah wasn't going to let him off the hook that easily. Instead, she forwarded the text to Maria, her lawyer, along with a brief note. "It's time. Let's make this public." Within hours, the press had caught wind of the story. John's financial misdeeds, including tax fraud and embezzlement, were splashed across the front pages of every local news outlet. The story hit hard, and soon, news networks were buzzing with coverage. But Sarah wasn't finished. She had one more card to play. That night, as she sat alone in her apartment, a message from Nina appeared on her phone. This one was different. It was more desperate. "You don't have to do this, Sarah. Please. John has already told me everything. I'm sorry for what I did, but I never wanted to hurt you. I'll leave him if it will make things right. Just please, don't destroy us." Sarah read the message, a bitter smile curling on her lips. Was Nina really trying to play the victim now? After everything she had done, after she had actively pursued Sarah's husband, now she wanted to beg for mercy? It was almost laughable. But Sarah wasn't about to make things easy for her. She had uncovered Nina's affair with a wealthy businessman, someone who had been funding her lavish lifestyle for months. The truth about Nina's manipulation would come to light as well. There was no way she would get off the hook. In the following days, Sarah made sure the public humiliation was complete. She released the evidence of Nina's affair, exposing her for the opportunistic liar she was. The story quickly gained traction, and Nina's reputation took a massive hit. It wasn't long before John's tech startup, his pride and joy, was officially investigated by the authorities. As the media painted him as a criminal, his company's stock plummeted, and key investors pulled out. John's downfall was swift and unforgiving. The business that had once seemed so invincible was now a sinking ship. But as Sarah watched everything unfold, something unexpected happened. A police officer came to her door one afternoon, holding an envelope marked with a confidential seal. "Are you Sarah Mitchell?" the officer asked, his expression serious. "Yes," Sarah replied, her pulse quickening. "Do you know a John Mitchell?" "Yes," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "We have reason to believe Mr. Mitchell is involved in a series of illegal activities. He's currently under investigation for financial crimes, including money laundering and tax fraud. But there's something else. We've received information that he's suffered a heart attack." Sarah felt a chill sweep over her. "A heart attack?" The officer nodded. "Yes, he's in the hospital in critical condition. We need to inform you as his spouse." Sarah's world suddenly spun. John had been under so much pressure, so many lies piling up, that it had all come crashing down on him. The stress of the investigation, the public humiliation, and the weight of his own guilt had clearly taken its toll. She could barely process it. The last thing she had expected was for his life to end in such a way. "Is he?" Sarah began, but the officer cut her off. "It's too early to say. The doctors are doing everything they can. But it doesn't look good." As the officer left, Sarah felt a numbness settle in. She had spent so long plotting this revenge, so long watching as John and Nina's lives unraveled, that she hadn't considered what would happen if it went too far. John's downfall wasn't just financial. It had destroyed him both professionally and personally. And now, with his life hanging in the balance, Sarah found herself faced with a moral dilemma she hadn't anticipated. Part of her felt a strange sense of justice. He had caused her so much pain, and now he was reaping the consequences. But another part of her couldn't shake the feeling that it was all happening too quickly, too drastically. The weight of it all pressed heavily on her shoulders. She had wanted to destroy him, to make him pay for everything he had done. But now, as she thought about what he had become, a broken man, possibly on the brink of death, she wondered if she had gone too far. Had she taken it too far? Had the satisfaction of revenge been worth it? As the night fell, Sarah stared out the window, the Miami skyline flickering in the distance. She knew that things would never be the same. No matter the outcome, her life had irrevocably changed. And the truth was, she wasn't sure what to feel anymore. The next few days passed in a blur for Sarah. She couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled deep within her. John's heart attack had left her in an emotional limbo, caught between satisfaction and guilt. She had fought for so long, exposed his lies, and watched him crumble. But now that he was on the brink of death, she found herself questioning everything. The news had spread fast. John was in a critical condition at the hospital, and the public was in a frenzy, both rooting for his recovery and condemning him for his actions. But for Sarah, the battle was over. She had reclaimed everything he had taken from her: the money, the business assets, and her dignity. John had no more power over her. But there was still Nina, the graphic designer who had been more than just a mistress. She had been part of a conspiracy that tore Sarah's life apart. Sarah had made sure Nina's secrets were revealed to the world, exposing her affair with another wealthy businessman, and the damage to Nina's reputation was irreversible. The public humiliation had been swift and unforgiving, and Nina was now left with nothing. She had no one to turn to, and even her connections in the business world were now shattered. Her fall from grace was as dramatic as John's. One afternoon, Sarah received a call from Maria, her lawyer. "Sarah, you need to come to the hospital. John is asking for you." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "What? Why?" "He's been asking to speak with you. He's very weak, but he wants to talk to you about the divorce settlement," Maria explained. Despite her better judgment, Sarah felt an odd pull to see him. She had won after all. The revenge had been complete. But was there something more she needed from him? Maybe a final confrontation, an end to the story they had begun all those years ago? When Sarah arrived at the hospital, she walked down the sterile, white hallway to John's room. The sight of him lying in the bed, pale, fragile, and hooked up to machines, was almost unrecognizable. The man who had once been full of power, confidence, and deceit was now reduced to a shell of his former self. John's eyes flickered open as she entered. He was weak, his voice barely a whisper. "Sarah," he croaked. Sarah stood at the door, her arms crossed, unsure of how to feel. "What do you want, John?" I don't have much time," he said, struggling to breathe. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." Sarah's heart clenched, but she didn't let herself show any emotion. "Sorry for what? For lying to me for years? For betraying me with Nina? For hiding everything from me?" Her voice was cold, hard, a reflection of the pain she had suffered. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," he said, his eyes pleading with her. "I made mistakes. I was stupid. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know." Sarah's gaze softened slightly, but she quickly hardened her heart again. "It's too late for apologies, John. You had your chance. You ruined everything, and now you're paying for it." John closed his eyes, his expression defeated. "I'm sorry. For everything. I never meant to hurt you." The silence between them was thick, filled with years of pain and betrayal. Sarah stood there for a moment longer, her mind racing. Then, with a final look at the broken man in the bed, she turned and walked out of the room. There was no closure here, no grand moment of forgiveness. John's life had been destroyed by his own choices, and there was nothing left for Sarah to salvage. Back in her apartment, Sarah sat in the quiet, staring out the window at the city she had once shared with him. The revenge was complete. The business was hers, the assets had been reclaimed, and Nina was nowhere to be found. But as Sarah thought about the path she had taken, she felt no satisfaction, no joy, just emptiness. She had won, but at what cost? A part of her had always believed that taking revenge would bring peace, but now she realized it had only hollowed her out. She had destroyed everything John had worked for, and in the process had lost a part of herself. Her trust in people, her ability to love, those things were gone, and she wasn't sure how to get them back. As the days passed, Sarah focused on rebuilding. She poured herself into her real estate work, making new investments, expanding her portfolio. She knew she could never go back to the woman she had been before John's betrayal, but she was determined to move forward. But the feeling of emptiness lingered. She had avenged herself. She had reclaimed her life. But was it enough? Could she ever find peace again? Or had the quest for revenge destroyed the very things that made life worth living? As she sat alone in her apartment that night, the city lights twinkling outside, Sarah realized that no amount of money, no amount of victory, could ever fill the hole left by the betrayal she had endured. And as the silence settled over her, she knew that her journey wasn't over yet. There was still much to rebuild. The story had come full circle, but for Sarah, the true battle was just beginning.